Remember the Greek myth of Medusa, the technology of looking at trauma indirectly through the mirror, through drama, through the Greek tragedies. A technology that we have largely lost, but which has some residue in metaphor, in poetry. In my childhood, in my first wave of unbearable emotion, at the edge of violence, when I looked at the room around me and realized that I could smash every item in that room into smithereens, and it would not touch the rage or the pain that I felt. That it was pointless, because no matter how much violence, no matter how much anger I expressed in the object space around me, it would not make a dent in the void, in the mass of layer upon layer upon layer of emotion. So I'm going to invite you to do something very un-Western, and that is to journey into this terrain with a bow to the Greeks, with a bow to metaphor, to drama, to pictures that hint at, in a variety of ways, that soften the blow. Because one of the greatest wounds of trauma, particularly in a legal system that can be more traumatic than the original trauma, is that only the direct gaze at Medusa is admissible in court. The dreams that take a consciousness into the terrain of the wound are not admissible in the court of science, in the court of law, and thus the court of culture. The wounds that are deepest and darkest, that cannot be examined, that cannot be explored directly, because to do so is to be turned to stone, to be frozen in shame, to become so overwhelmed one dissociates miles and miles and miles above small specks of bodies on the ground that have no meaning. But can you look, can you infer, will you study in the direct language of psychology the objects in the space here unspoken? Will you study, will you look, will you admit the poetic truths that some part of you lives in? Or will you throw it all out, inadmissible, demanding, in the greatest brutality of all, that the child who has been molested by his or her parents talk about it in court, in a barbaric and sociopathic environment that is more traumatic than the incident. The incident was a violation of psychological boundaries. The medicine in a sick culture is the denial of everything organic and human about the process, from the pain and trauma when Broca's area within the brain shuts down, because to process this trauma in language is too overwhelming. When the region in the brain that measures time freezes and a moment that is but a moment becomes eternal. And you, will you stand in your laboratory? Will you stand waiting with pincers, scissors, and vials, expectantly waiting for a measurable sample, proved and verifiable? Could we have that torture again? Could we confirm the consistency of human consciousness yet again? Or must we dismiss it, that what we experience as most profound in our own hearts and minds has no basis? That, in the words of one of our great evolutionary biologists, Richard Dawkins, we are but lumbering robots with consciousness, a delusion not verifiable by science. That we are but unconscious expressions of nature's program. And all of the stuff in 2/3 of who we are, the mental, the emotional body, detritus in a meaningless evolutionary path, that these words are nothing at all, mere random chance. The 60,000 words, the art, the shared experience of millions of years. Nothing. Random chance. Meaningless detritus in a big bang that popped for no reason out of nowhere. As Sheldrake says, give us one free miracle, one event that happened for reasons we can't prove scientifically, we don't know why. Give us one free miracle, that everything came from nothing in an instant, and we will explain the rest, including why you, in all your emotion and humanity, are an illusion, a random byproduct of a program that has nothing to do with you. Where do you stand? Do you have meaning? Do you have choice in this moment? Can you listen if you want to? Has the program that has taken away your poetry, that has denied the understanding on an intuitive level of our grief, the grief of our young, being consumed to protect an addictive pattern, and a paradigm that has no room for joy, ecstasy, love, growth, and consciousness. Will you follow me on these flights, or dismiss them as more meaningless babble? Get to the point, sir. We have no time for rabble. Did he or did he not do this? Do you have evidence to support this? You are sentenced to a cell. That this meaningless court, this meaningless consciousness, has conjured as some other minor form of detritus in an evolutionary path. That we were just following orders. We don't care about people. We care about the law. We don't care about what you need. It's the protocol, stupid. Show up for 1 to 2 hours and I will take notes as you relive hell upon hell upon hell and take my fee. If it works, great. If not, that's just the way things are in a culture where therapists too deserve a sociopathic life. The freedom to feel nothing and have the same money as someone else to go and buy things that define our cultural dream of success. It's not the patient that matters, but the doctor. He's got a romantic date at 6, so the operation with complications should move a little faster. A procedure more risky for your life, but more reliable to end on time, edged ahead of the optimum protocol that might involve loving and caring for another human being, beyond money, beyond time. To stand there in reverence of a moment, honored to hold in the balance a probability field of another person's life. And so it is in this realm of poetry and sight, of poetry and beauty, that I step lightly over painful wounds. Too blisteringly severe, too radiated by unozonated sunlight to handle the full weight of a human heel, grinding it down to get to the bottom, to punch through the skin. This terrain is our heritage, is our birthright. Like the overdeveloped left brain that can count 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 is 8, but cannot tell us when we are wandering far, far away from the resonance of our own truth, down a cultural rabbit hole that will leave many of us questioning, lost, alone, in a world in which we cannot speak because the words that wish to be spoken have no place in a lineal world, in a world in which our deepest longings go unseen behind rituals of how are you and I am fine, the signature of the tomb of truth, of presence, a ritual we dare not break by opening an egg and spilling yolk that does not complete or even reach its final definition in the 2 to 10 seconds allowed by cultural norms to answer a question that was never intended to be sincere. When someone floating in the edge in those clouds of trauma where things are boundaryless, where the secrets have never been welcomed, always denied, when far over the clouds of that floating high above the body, those words come, how are you, you, you? How does one answer? How does one long to be found? And yet, the technology slips like water through a sieve in a pace where a 10-minute grid blocks out 99 of 100 objects, of 100 patterns that are much longer than 10 minutes, when the wavelengths of time are obscured by the short sieve of information protocol, where a 1-mile wave does not fit through a 1-millimeter hole, where patterns that take place over a lifetime are invisible to eyes that focus on an hour and then the hour is up. When anyone exploring those big waves is angrily censored as stepping out of line. How dare you waste our time? How dare you fill our minds with such nonsense when we, denizens of a citadel of efficiency, money, and clear glass, are wasting time? How dare you? How dare you denigrate this temple of efficiency and lies? Of efficiency and clean, idealistic, inhuman glass ideals that has no space for the hand-drawn picture of rape that destroy the clean lines, the simplistic vistas of a vacuous modern architecture. in which personality is beautifully liberated to oblivion, the ideal of the modern machine, uncluttered by its maker, its human being. We long in sociopathic dreams to become one with those stainless steel shapes, the shapes that perform their protocol without deviation or humanity, that have no feeling at all, solving all wounds in an instant of oblivion. If we could all be like that, if we could all be as sociopathic as our rock stars, our heroes, the people who in the midst of poisoned and 1,000 arrows shot with envy, rage, and bitterness, blew it all off and rose to the top anyways, reminding us that we also could take a pathway in which no one matters but our own success, our own image, the golden calf, replacing something deeper, something more real, something our culture has forgotten and layered and layered and layered, till even exploring the grave is taboo. Into this world which will never fit inside a test tube, which no decent scientist blessed by modernity would dare to come near, because she too might be swept away by the vortice, by the gravitational pull of a black hole that is much deeper than 400 years of science. They might have to acknowledge the angel that came to René Descartes, that he wrote about, the angel that told him nature will be conquered by measurement, by numbers. It was an angel, some hundreds of years ago, coming to Descartes, that gave birth to this wave of madness in which the beauty and the gifts of measuring and numbers have been elevated above their status as mere tools for intelligence to use to bring love, to bring balance, to regulate the energies for human well-being. What angel could have dreamed that the consciousness bestowed with such a gift would turn on its benefactor and say, the angel that came to Descartes in a vision does not exist because it cannot be measured. because it doesn't have a number, because it doesn't fit into the test tube it's suggested. Reality, by definition, is far bigger than the mind that can perceive it. Set theory says we cannot understand a set unless we are beyond it. The Mandelbrot set, an infinite series of numbers taking shapes, fractals, repeating suggestively, but never the same. We'll go on for infinity. And yet we only understand it because we are not a Mandelbrot set. We are the consciousness that engineered it. We are the witness. We are the designer. We are the one giving birth to an infinite pattern that we are not bound to. In all this poetry, in all this imagery, in the tapestry of 10,000 cultures, 10,000 languages throughout history, 10,000 belief systems, all of which said they were right, there's only one question. When it comes right down to it, does an individual, does someone like you and I receive the technology of love, the technology of communication, the technology of balance, health, truth, and well-being to become that probability field in which we bring our best, in which you bring your best, in which a citizenry, a populace, brings its best. Is there service and attunement to the individual from birth to go through the mammalian process to become a human and spiritual being, to reach up to some part of us waiting to precipitate into a shape that can hold it, waiting to take form in a glass whose holes have been patched, whose surface has been polished, such that it can contain and reveal what wants to come down, what has been waiting for us as a species, as a human, as a culture for millennia. Do we say welcome to the unknown guest? Or do we close our doors, hiding from the voice we don't understand, from the emotions that go too deep, from the truths that are too painful, from the lies we don't even want to acknowledge are there? Do we betray ourselves by rejecting these guests, by sending them home unfed? And look out on a hungry, starving world and feel unsafe and restless in our dream of hate and separation. Who are we in this tapestry? Who are our allies helping to bring a new world in? We all do the best we can with the clunky furniture stuffed into a house we have inherited. We cannot walk easily without banging our shins, our wrists, our elbows. We are sore from banging into the structures that are not ours, but which we are asked to bow to with deference. We are asked to apologize for the truth that is inside. And it is in this light that we look at a pattern again. Hours of an evening, overwhelm, so much tightness in the muscles, it's hard to breathe, so much rage, so much explosion. Will he be punished for exposing the secret always abandoned? Or will he be held just a little at the edge of the frozen doorway? This is the question as the hours go by, as the email is sent, as the secret is told from a deep place, frightening, alone, 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 knowing that no one wants to know what's coming out of this voice. No one wants to see the shadow of the golden Buddha cast when the sun shines directly in its face, and yet behind there is always a shadow that every culture on earth, what will happen when the shadow is spoken? In the morning, choreographed lines from a legal department. Yes, we have read your email, listened to your recording. No, we will not talk about our feelings or yours. We will not come to you in that lonely night. We will meet behind closed doors, leaving you on the outside, and we will decide your fate. We who talk of love, who talk of health, who talk of truth and commitments, we are meeting behind those doors. We are meeting without you. We did not hear your cry for help. We did not hear the danger you are in. We did not hear your request for dignity and love. What we heard amidst the chaos and crying of doves and crows upon a stormy night was that our house is in danger. Our house could fall to the weirdo in a group that has always left us with question. We heard our house could fall. We need to regroup. We need to defend against the threat that buttresses our fragile walls. And you are on the outside. Explosions of grief, of tragedy, explosions of fireworks set off by the flames of fear, the flames of unattended caution. Legal paragraphs from all but one. No calls, no holding, no acknowledgement. And then the harassed voice of Peter on the phone, so beleaguered. What is it now? Why do you plague me with your needs, with your confusion, with your inane humanness? Haven't I done enough all these months when I took your money and did what I did for you? Was it not enough? No, it was not enough. I am in more pain than I have ever been in, and you have shut down every doorway, and I will not listen to your martyrhood again. Go and listen to the recording that you have not even bothered to hear. I do not need your self-pitying fatigue. I do not need to hear the quiet, dramatic martyrhood of parents who always threw up their hands, wondering why. Why was it that all 5 children who seemed to have so much promise were stealing cars, were locked in their room, were having tantrums, were shouting, had no respect? Hadn't these parents given a roof over their head? Hadn't they sacrificed their whole existence to evoking the demon that is possible within every angel, just as the angel is possible within every demon? Hadn't they been through enough? Every story has its facts. Every story has a timeline. This story has hundreds of emails, recordings, a database of overwhelming knowledge. And yet patterns recur. They had their meeting behind closed doors. Peter cutting off a conversation I asked him to have as soon as possible, to go to a meeting I was not at, to have a decision made that I was not included in. To find myself, as I had been with Peter for 6 months, on the outside, not let in, not seen, not allowed or invited to the table. And yet, what group of doctors meets to discuss the medicine without first examining the patient? What doctor suppresses the communication, blocking out all feedback of the result of their medicine for months on end, and expects a sane recovery? What doctor seeks to recommend a treatment before knowing a diagnosis? What doctor but high, committed to a world in which everyone wins except them, except the patient, except their client? As I protect myself from a wave of emotion that within 3 days of reaching out for help had exploded and become 5 times bigger than the original shape, calling frantically to every facilitator through email, I have never felt this painful. I have never felt this insane. I have never felt this lonely, this terrified. Please help. And the official doctrine of an organization dedicated to love, intimacy, and sexuality is handed down by Jason, CEO of HIGH. This is not a HIGH issue. We will not get involved. We don't have time for this. This is something you negotiated with Peter and must sort out with him alone. We will not tell you of a protocol we have agreed to behind closed doors, that Peter does not have our permission to meet with you or talk with you alone. We will not include you in the decision that narrows the possibility of information flow and healing to a trickle, because while he cannot meet with you alone, an agreement we made on our own and did not tell you about, we do not have time in our minds. We did not have time to train. We did not have time to get licensed. We did not have time to explain to you, a mere participant, about the limitations of our expertise. We did not have time to get you help when we hurt you. We did not have time to stop your life tumbling into a free fall with our ignorance. We did not have time to repair the damage, and now we do not have time to listen to you. You who have made this problem clearly on your own. You who are considered an adult in this culture regardless of internal state. You made your bed. Now lie in it. This is not our doing. It wasn't his parents' doing. It wasn't his teacher's doing. It wasn't Lazarus's doing. It wasn't the therapist's doing. It wasn't the government's doing. It wasn't the country's doing. It wasn't your siblings' doing. It was yours. You are the problem. In the wave upon wave of focusing in, the weight of a nation is pinpointed on a single child, and they know they are the problem. They know that if only they could die, everyone else would be happy, because then there could be the parade of dramatic procession, the wave in which everyone around could show up in the beautiful garments in the cathedral and say, "He had so much promise. Why did he have to take his own life?" If only we could have done something. We will not define what something was, because we might have to do it preemptively to the young men and women who are in almost as much agony. We will not look at the wound that existed and still exists in all of us, maintained by the somber closure. We have done our part to talk about the needless loss of human life. We have done our part. He has solved our problem. The bastard never made us look at ourselves. If he had, we'd have murdered him in an instant. The challenge is always the same. How do you inflict the blade without culpability? How do you kill with the feigned innocence of surprise? That masterful blossoming of wonder. I had no idea. I didn't let you speak. I never had the time. I interrupted you at every turn. I lied to you. I told you you didn't feel that way. I told you your experience wasn't valid. I told you it wasn't wanted. I told you it was wrong. I told you to do it differently, to feel differently, to think differently. And I'm astounded that I didn't know who you are. I didn't know my impact. Are you sure there's not something wrong with you? Are you sure you tried everything? Edward Snowden asked to participate in an illegal spying and cover-up operation with billions of taxpayer dollars, explored all his options, but that wasn't good enough. You didn't go to the superiors who would have fired and imprisoned you. You are the enemy of our country because you have put us in danger by revealing the treachery, the deceit, the waste, the abuse of our civil liberties, the liberties upon which our country pays lip service but often ignores. Is there a difference in the way we treat the trauma survivor, the incest survivor? How did the Catholic Church respond when wave upon wave of sexual abuse was revealed to them? Did they make amends? This pinnacle of love, forgiveness, and spirituality, did they make amends? Did they take ownership? What did they say when the Spanish, sailing across to the Americas, discovered gold in Tahiti? Were they to respect the rights of a sovereign populace that had peace and respect amongst the sexes, hospitality and kindness and gentleness, unmatched by our own? The slaughter of tens of thousands was sanctioned to secure gold. We cannot deny the sociopathic heritage of our country, of our Western world, of our Western religions. And we cannot pretend that in this culture, any institution will transcend itself to protect the individual. We are laid like sacrificial virgins on the dragon's altar of an institutional mind, the institution of the country, of the presidency, of the legal system, of the Human Awareness Institute must not be threatened. And those that reveal dark corners, the Julian Assange, the Edward Snowden, that rare individual who speaks becomes the enemy, not the light bringing thought and reflection, not the medicine of a corrupt and diseased body, but the enemy to be persecuted, the enemy that must carefully outwit the veiled hate and hostility that a mere individual, a mere citizen, a mere employee, a mere client, a mere patient would threaten this noble institution. An institution pompous with lies and hypocrisy, an institution that is obscuring the human kindness and decency, where human beings cannot behave like human beings. An IRS agent can't say, "Dane, I'm so sorry to hear this. You've paid so many taxes in. I had no idea you had chronic fatigue. I had no idea. Please do what you need to do, and I'm not going to take that money." But this simple act of humanity that I'm sure my auditor was well capable of was hardened into sociopathic hate by a law and protocol in which he would be fired if he did not enforce the law, in which the judge would be fired if they didn't enforce the law. The law is more important than its people. When legal concerns come into play, it is a traumatic event for the identities of those present. When a secret is revealed, it is a traumatic experience for the identities around which the secret is held. And it is natural, though unkind, unjust, and brutal, to turn on the secret holder. A young man had exhausted every possible way to gracefully cope with the situation in which he found himself alone, lied to, abandoned, controlled, and tucked away, where the only person with whom he could integrate and make sense of one of the most intense and profound experiences of his life was the only person who wouldn't talk, the only person who shamed him for speaking the truth, the only person who said, "Nothing's going on here," and used that lie to hide a roiling, boiling cauldron of inadequacy, fears, terror, shame, secrets, and overwhelm he did not have the ability to deal with on his own, and felt unsafe and unable to ask for help. And he, right after the client, the patient, seeking help, shared this story not with the police, not with the media, but with his peers, asking them to help him. One of the first things he said to his client was, "Dane, I will never trust you again for this entire lifetime. You have betrayed my trust by telling my peers and my wife about the experiences I concealed from them, about the agreements I broke with them. You have hurt me. This is all your fault, and I will never trust you again. Now let's get on with what I've got to do to get out of this mess you have created for me." Come on, what is it? And do you realize I could lose my job? I could lose my job over this. I like doing this work. I'm good at it. And I could lose my job. The board is getting involved. A facilitator, a therapist and a healer, adept at tuning out the needs of his client, his patient, at being paid to do what is easiest, what is best, what is convenient and expedient for him. The patient is still in trauma. The patient is still ignored. There is no one on the board of directors of an organization amongst 9 facilitators who has called and wanted to understand. He asked for someone to come to his house because the last time he drove on the road, he felt he was endangering his own life and someone else's. But this fact was obscured by an organization rife with the legal implications, perhaps concerned that having any more involvement would put them at higher risk, determining instead that the organization needed to protect itself so that it could continue loving its participants, continue its mandate of a world in which everyone wins. And one of their number had carelessly inserted a client and participant. And the first wave was denial. Anne Watts, who had championed so many righteous causes when they were not her own, when she finally called, well, I can see how you might feel this way if that happened, if Peter did these things, and if this and if that, I could see how you might feel some of that way. But we don't know the truth over here because we haven't invited you to talk to us. We haven't come to your house to listen to the recording you've told us about. Could you please put it up on Dropbox or Google so that we don't have to meet you, so that we can figure out what's going on here? It's a big ordeal we're meeting over here, but you are not our concern. Your safety, your well-being, this is alarming to us, and we have to deal with our problem. We have no time for you. And Peter has no time to talk. He must meet and talk with us. In the meeting, you are not welcome in. So just sit there and be blamed for ruining Peter's life. Feel badly that you are not receiving any of the help you've asked. And go along with our protocol. And like the good little boy that he was, so used to being attacked for speaking the truth when he was young, the first play out of this pattern of abuse and hypocrisy. So familiar with the anger directed at him for the audacity of speaking the truth in an under-resourced, under-educated, terrified community that's doing its best without national government or cultural support to deal with emotional wounds that are generations deep and just as deep in denial. So he sits there alone, shaking, as the big people decide what will be done, decide how to solve the mess he has created, because they can't very well deny a truth that Peter was so careless to allow to be recorded. Of course they tried. Peter denied that he'd kept anything from Sarah. It's right on the tape. Peter started spinning, but it can't be lied to. You can't lie to a recording. There is betrayal upon betrayal upon betrayal to those who are traumatized. And one of the betrayals is the request by the abuser that you go insane, that you be asked to doubt yourself at a time when you need to depend on yourself more than ever before. You are asked to doubt your memory, your clarity, what happened. You're asked to say, no, that didn't happen. No, we love you. We're here to help you. We just want the best for you. No, that didn't happen. Just agree to the lie, and you can remain a part of this community. Agree to the lie. In her book, The Body Never Lies, Alice Miller explores this tension between the cultural program and the body that cannot tell a lie, because the body has an accurate record of every sensation. The body knows the truth, and we can fight it. We can hide from it. We can addict it and smother it for decades. But this does not hide the nuanced, detailed script written within the lines of the body, within the lines of neurons. Traumatic memories never fade. They are as crisp and nuanced and accurate 50 years later as they were the day they occurred. Unlike the politicizing of many memories within the mind, traumatic memories stay true. And the question becomes, will an abuser, will a family, will a community betray the abuse survivor to protect the comfort of an organization, a community, an abuser? Or will they take a stand for the sanity, for the fact that when in overwhelming trauma, one needs to be able to count on oneself more than ever before, particularly when being betrayed by those held in esteem and leadership and trust all around you. Will you be championed in that very minimal of areas that yes, this happened? Or will you be asked for the convenience of those who do not want to see the wound to deny its existence, to discount it? No, I never said that. It's common What's rare is having it on video, on tape. I felt so much terror. I felt so much grief, because what I was fighting was an awareness that I had been betrayed, set up, lied to, and thrown away by all of the people I had trusted most and who were most ethically bound, from childhood right up to adulthood, from my therapists, from my leaders, from my parents, from my teachers. And the amount of agony, of loneliness, of grief and betrayal, when that starts to dawn on the conscious mind that cannot perceive another pattern that explains the behavior of all present, the anomalies. The lawyerly Anne compared to the passionate Anne. The denial of stuff on tape. I had sent Peter the recording months prior and asked him to listen to it. He had it. I'd gone to great trouble to email a 10-hour file. And without thanking, paying attention, acknowledging, or listening. I never said that. No, that's not the way it is. And it's such a betrayal. It's such a betrayal of the core and the spirit of who we are. We cannot fight a pattern as long as we are more invested in denying its existence than we are in taking care of our ethical and human responsibilities. A healer has a Hippocratic oath to do no harm, to put the interests of their patient ahead of any other responsibility. And this makes a doctor's role sacred, be that a doctor of the heart, a doctor of the mind, a doctor of the body. And when we have birds choosing to fall from the sky and plunge deep into icy waters without defending themselves, because plunging, giving up, and dying is more peaceful, more sane, more healing than continuing the battle with oneself that a culture that has partitioned and aligned two factions in civil war, than fighting a civil war when it becomes easier to give up than to fight the battle or confront the numerous adversaries all lined up in a circle, denying the truth. Those birds flutter from the sky, and it is their mind and heart that have been warped and twisted, that have been infected with lies, not their body. And it is a mental, emotional healer that has the ethical responsibility, the scientific possibility of keeping birds alive. It is an ethical responsibility to know one's limitations, to know one's qualifications, to seek help when one does not have the skill and the technology to keep one's patient alive when one doesn't have the protocol and training to do no harm. It is the human, spiritual, legal, and ethical responsibility to seek help, to see that a client, a patient, a human being receives the support that is in everyone's interest. The very culture that is killing us is the culture that depends on our tax revenue. No one wins. When a person is too sick to cope, too traumatized to live, too distracted with coping mechanisms and addiction to contribute, no one wins. The lie hurts everyone. The lie, the invisible pattern defended at all cost, in the olden times, it was a virgin princess left on a rock to assuage the voracious appetite of the dragon, so that the dragon would not terrorize the village. That dragon is fear. That dragon is dread. And we, like the fiefdoms of old, lay our young and innocent on a stony bed, asking and praying, take this one, leave the culture alone, leave us safe from the terrors of uncertainty, of chaos, from the fear that we feel when we realize we may not know what we're doing. We ask you, fear, dragon, dread, to take our young, our vulnerable, our innocent, and leave the structure of our institution intact. Be satisfied with this. And this is the beginning of corruption, of the descent of a culture that will sacrifice its magic and its innocence, its beauty and its potential to sustain the staid and often hollow structures of what is. And that's why it is a knight, a heroine, or a hero that must say no. I will not let this innocent one die in these flames. I will go to battle with the dragon to protect the innocent. And this is the resurrection of a culture, of an institution. When the innocent is considered too valuable, when the shame of sacrificing and the shame of accepting the sacrifice of a princess who goes willingly to the rock to protect her people, who does her duty in the way duty is defined within her culture, and is torn to shreds by people who cover their eyes, who don't want to think about the wound, who weep inwardly knowing that it is their own innocence, their own cowardice, their own grief, their own young, their own magic that is being eaten, that the soul of a culture that allows this is what is being torn to shreds. As the dragon takes the princess and claws her into nothing. No one can witness the truth of that protocol and not be torn to shreds. And no one can participate in a terrified, regressed, overwhelmed young man whose body is erupting volcanically with the lies and the grief and the flames of a volcano that cannot be silenced, that cannot be kept in the dark forever, only to be placed on a stone outcrop. This time with a slight advantage, because Anne Watts, his therapist, was chartered with a mission to hold his hand as his body destroyed itself, as his body collapsed in adrenal fatigue, as the emotions spiked, as the dread of the next lie, as the dread of being torn to pieces by the love of an organization and wanting to protect it, and the love of oneself and wanting to speak the truth, by the terror of being attacked by perpetrators without the honor to own and make amends for their wound, and the anger and rage that had never been louder. She held my hand through this agony, which got worse and worse and worse. December 10th was the day he broke open the egg and let the truth fall down, no longer willing to carry a secret that was burning his hands that were already exhausted with fatigue, and let that egg fall, asking for someone to carry the load. Someone who had more energy, more skill, more ethics, and could protect him and the man he loved. The man he loved and now hated, but still loved. In the memory of a most beautiful moment, in the memory of moments of kindness, in moments of magnificence, in which his hero, his facilitator, his therapist, protector had been there, had helped him make a crossing that might be pivotal to his life, but had now spiraled round in a 100-degree angle and aimed his guns at the innocent fetus giving birth being born in that process, now rotting, meat deteriorating, smelling. Something very beautiful was dying. And its grave was dishonored and unmourned, denied and obscured by curtains of communication control that made it impossible to see any coherent pattern. A coherent pattern of lies, denies, shadows, and dark, scary thoughts that took all of his healers' fears and shames and populated his psychic space and mind with the unspoken weapon, the weapon unnamed, the weapon too hot to handle but not too hot to give to the one he was charged to protect. The weapon of fear, of terror, of shame, and of loneliness, incredible loneliness. The deepest wound in someone betrayed, lied to, shamed, betrayed, lied to, shamed, betrayed, and lied to. The loneliness of that truth at the center of that wound, who knows it is beautiful, who knows that it is more beautiful than any one or all of the 100 layers of shame and lies, but also knows it is not welcome. It is not welcome at this table. It has been banished, cursed, and is turning fetid, putrid, sick without oxygen in its binding prison. At some point, the lies must be lifted. And a culture, a country, a community, a circle and its people must look at what it is doing to itself, at what it is doing to the future, to others, that rather than potentiating life, it is using its energy to destroy life. The trauma of being repeatedly lied to, that this was not a high issue. That it is not a high issue. That a high facilitator, chosen by high, trained by high, recommended by high, met at a high workshop with agreements to high, designed to protect the participant and the client, has systematically trashed those agreements in a way that has caused immense harm over a 12-year period, repeatedly, and that the facilitator body itself ignores and blocks out the whispers of this wound, that this is not a matter for the organization to support, to look into, to care about, to take a stand for. That its participants, that its clients do not matter to the organization. If this might put the organization in any kind of legal, financial jeopardy. This is not a high issue. We, as an organization, will not get involved other than Peter will be sent to will take a course in ethical training. You trusted us, hard luck. You trusted each one of us. You trusted Peter because of high. Because you thought we knew what we were doing. Because you thought we were committed to our mission statement of everyone winning. Because you thought we practiced our clear communications that we teach. Because you trusted us, you have gotten hurt. That has nothing to do with us. You, poor fool, made a mistake. And you, the individual, not the community, not the organization, not the board, must take the consequences. We will leave you with someone in a sociopathic state without the skill and training to take care of you. We will not get help. We will not learn. We will not include you. We will not ask more questions. And we will start rejecting your emails because we don't have time to listen and read them. This is what I heard. This is what I felt, and my trauma went up 300%, realizing I had no one, realizing that by taking this stance, I had in a moment lost my community and all of my support. Anne was my favorite therapist to turn to in crisis. This was the biggest crisis I was dealing with, and she was betraying me. She was putting her alliance to an organization theoretically devoted to love, intimacy, and healthy relationships above actually loving me, actually taking a stand for me. If that meant exposing. I asked for help from the team. They didn't want the team to know. We're keeping this under wraps. And I did not know at that point what trauma was. I didn't know what the word meant. I didn't know that I had it. I didn't know that was what was happening to me over and over again within this relationship with Peter. I did not know it had happened to me as a child. I didn't know the biology of trauma. Anne left me to go teach a workshop on love, intimacy, and sexuality. And none of the other facilitators would talk to me because they'd already decided this was not their stuff. And Anne left me. And I was in a bad way. And I was worried I couldn't get through the weekend without some support because this was getting worse. Every denial, every lie, everything that was happening within the organization was sending me the message, I'm not safe here. But I had nowhere else to go. And trauma is an emotion that cannot be dealt with alone. Trauma and shame are two human states where you need help. Never try and deal with them alone. That leads straight to addiction, suicide. You need help. And you need a lot of help. And you need trustworthy help. But what happens when your resource, when your deity of support is the source of your wound? What happens when it's your priest who's molesting you? Who do you pray to? I was in an emotional state that I could not cope with. I couldn't be alone, and yet every hour I was with Anne and noticed the gap between the Anne I knew in the workshop and the Anne that was with me. Every hour I noticed that she did not publicly make any effort to stop this process of being buried as a dirty secret. Every time I wrote why this should be a high issue, why the trust in the organization erodes by anyone who understands what's going on, if it is not considered, one, a high issue, and two, treated nobly and ethically with a commitment to learn everything that could possibly be learned. Every time I expressed that if High was not responsible before, its turning its back on me in this condition made it negligent, criminally negligent, if I died and couldn't make it through this, if my health deteriorated. Because when your group of support shames you, blames you, denies you, around the very wound of being shamed, blamed, and denied, and this is your community. These are your teachers, your leaders, the people you respect. It is like being outcast by your hero, by your role model. It is the deepest shame because it divides the self, because the one self is trying to emulate and has respect. But the more it emulates and has respect, the lower its own self-image becomes, because there is rejection and a complete message that you are expendable. If you invest money in a company that uses the money to deny and destroy you, this is a divisive act. You're splitting yourself. But you cannot pivot away when you're in trauma and in a place of need. When you have early childhood attachment trauma and have never had a secure bond with either parent, the desperation, the need, the loneliness is unbearable. So even if the mind can afford to grasp, this is not safe at all, you need to get out of here, if there's not somewhere to go. The studies show that the abuse survivor turn home, will run back, will defend the abuser. I'd met this as a child. And this is why the ethical and responsible barrier to protect the individual whose trust is in your hands is so high. This is why one of the authors of the book The Secret, who charged some of his participants up to $100,000 a year to go through all of his intense trainings, and one of them was a sweat lodge. And in one of those sweat lodges, people started telling him, "I feel like I'm going to die." And he said, "This is when the winners and losers separate. If you really want to get your money's worth from me, you go all the way and you stay in this sweat lodge. Because this is what separates the winners from the losers." And they all stayed in. 3 died and 17 experienced major health issues. And he was convicted criminally for using his influence to push someone in a direction that was the opposite of what was good for them, and telling them that this is what they needed. He went to prison. Criminally negligent for using his influence. Obviously he didn't want them to die, but he didn't know what he was doing. He was determined that they get their money's worth. He was not looking out, number one, for the well-being of people who trusted him. It's an interesting documentary. These patterns ripple through our society and culture. One of my biggest griefs on psychedelics was realizing that I was so terrified that almost every survival thing that kept me alive was a manipulative coping strategy. That in my business relationships, I have a very good contract. It just means that no one can hurt me. And so they don't. Because when I didn't have that contract, people took advantage of me in the most painful ways. And the only thing stopping that seems to be this contract. So I have it, and every client signs it, and now nobody hurts me. That's a terrifying world to live in, when the only thing that stands between you and being abused is whether you are smart enough to anticipate every single thing that could go wrong and write in a clause that legally makes it in the other person's interest to do what's right. And yet, life is too complicated. We need to be able to trust individuals to ethically and morally live up to their responsibility. And I was learning that just as I could not depend on Peter to do that, just as I could not depend on my parents to do that, just because could not depend on my teachers, just like I could not depend on my neighbors, or even the good-willing friend who listened to me and told me I should focus on forgiving my parents rather than understanding and validating. That every emotion is like an iron filing pattern. We do not create all the shapes in our environment. We have some influence. But when you play a steel plate and the iron filings organize themselves in a pattern, in a geometric pattern, a knowledgeable person can tell the sound that was played based on the shape of the geometric pattern. A knowledgeable emotional healer and therapist can tell the shapes that are in the environment of a child and individual based on the configuration and intensity and shapes of the emotions in that child. someone without that expertise. The gardener who doesn't know how to garden will focus on telling the iron filings to take a different shape than the sound that is being played in the environment. They will try to negotiate with each filings. Well, couldn't you agree to like this, and couldn't you see it like this and like this and like that? And they'll try and talk to the filings while leaving the sound that is shaping them untouched. A knowledgeable gardener doesn't need a fourth commandment to say, thou shalt love thy parents, a commandment to feel a certain feeling, regardless of the environment in which the feeling has taken place. An intelligent source knows that the emotions always respond authentically to the environment. And although the environmental patterns in history are often too complicated, for a human brain with the limited amount of training we've been granted, which in many cases is less than a few days, compared to 8 years of airline piloting or 8 years to become a physician, a knowledgeable gardener moves the rose into the sun. An ignorant gardener leaves the rose in the shade and starts yelling at the rose, starts withholding water, starts hitting it with a shovel and saying, if you don't grow, I'm going to cut you down. After doing that a few hundred times, the ignorant gardener cuts the rose. I told you, what else can I do with you, you measly failure? Why don't you grow like those other roses in that other garden? Because you, the gardener, don't have the knowledge to move a single plant into the sun, or the trust that a plant wants to grow. It just needs water, sunlight, and some good soil. A child will always love their parents when the parent is attuned, when the parent is safe, when the parent protects the child and is willing to betray the culture, and the organizational structures around it to stay attuned with the well-being of that child. A child will have mixed feelings with their parents if they can tell the parent means well and is attuned to them when they are together, but regularly betrays that child to cultural and organizational protocols, including school, that are barbaric. A child will loathe and despise a parent that betrays them to organizational and cultural protocols that cause enormous harm and states of helplessness, trauma, hate, rage, and humiliation, and then asks the child to lie to them. Communicates directly, overtly, and indirectly, I am so busy doing all this for you that I have no time to hear anything that you have to say other than that you're doing fine. And I will be angry at you. I will have a fit. I will break down. I will complain to you, my child. How am I supposed to get my papers done and my this done and my that done if you need this attention? I've got 2 hours of this. I've got this and that and the other. Okay, Mom and Dad. I will live in hell, the hell you have subjected me to, and I will keep the secret. I will pretend that I'm fine so that you can pretend you're a good parent, so that you can get your paperwork done, so that you can make the money to send me to these sick institutions that are hurting me. If that's what you need, if that's your ultimate request, and you will punish and shame me if I don't do it, and you'll call me a good little girl and a good little boy if I do, I will. And if I need to say I love you because then you're really insecure, and you need constant validation because some part of you knows this is shit. It's all bullshit. And you're selling me out to look normal. If you need that, fine. I love you, Mom. Okay. And then I'll start cutting my body. I'll start tearing things up because I've gotten the message loud and clear. My truth, my experience is the problem. And if I would just cooperate, if my iron filings would just hear a D-, but instead wouldn't take the form of a D-, instead would take the form of a G major, the happy sound, everyone would be happy. And it's my fault. This is the cowardice of almost every parent in an overcommitted, indebted, manic, rat race Western world. And to maintain the addictive cycle, one innocent, one princess after another, handed willingly to a dragon that will eat the soul out, that will eat the heart out of a culture, of a community, of a person. And to make sure it doesn't get brought into question, to make sure the culture is protected from the dreaded unknown of chaos, we will stamp out anyone with the temerity. We'll spend all our diplomatic energy to see that Julian Assange has house arrest in Peru, in the Peruvian embassy in the United Kingdom. We'll write new laws. We'll try and reclassify journalism as terrorism. We'll send our citizenry hopping around the world until they can only find refuge in Russia. Because that's what we do in a democracy committed to the right to pursue happiness, to freedom and the right to pursue happiness, to truth, to justice for all. That's the way we behave around here. And we don't like it when someone points out that it's not quite that way behind closed doors. My friend Fred Burks, a former presidential interpreter for 2 presidents, decides to take a stand for truth and talk about the way Indonesia was manipulated behind closed doors to do things not in the interest of the American people, not in the interest of Indonesia, and then lie about it. The response is simple. The contract for presidential interpreters gets rewritten so that no presidential interpreter can even tell his wife what went on, or he's made a terrorist, a felon. We don't like truth tellers. We like lies. And we like liars that are good enough that they don't get caught. People aren't angry at Peter for letting me down, for betraying my innocence and my trust. They're angry at Peter for being on tape, for getting caught. for doing it so stupidly. They're furious. He was not talking to me about how very sorry he was and how much he'd hurt me. The same conversation in which he told me he's never going to trust me again, he's ruminating. He's saying, what would Stan Dale think of me? It's like I've let him down. No, Peter, you've let me down, and you're still letting me down by putting all of your weight, first your marriage weight, now your weight, onto the person you promised to take a stand for. And Hai has let you down by not training you to even know that you're letting me down. And your friends have let you down by letting you get away with a blind spot that is blatant for anyone who gets near you. And you've let yourself and everyone down by running around so quickly that it's hard to see, by hiding so cleverly and carefully, by moving around so quickly it's hard to get a lock on your signature. I'm very good at getting a lock on people's signature, and I couldn't get a lock on yours for 6 months. You were that charming and that clever at delaying, procrastinating, denying, hiding. You denied you had any blind spots. You denied there was any issue. You didn't answer any of the key questions. You controlled the email. You said, let's talk about it later. You said, let's talk about it later again. You created a diversion with a completely inappropriate woman, and you said, let's talk about it again. That's how good you are at not being seen. And boy, were you furious when I outed you. You weren't furious that I got hurt. You weren't furious that I was ripped off. You weren't furious that my heart was broken. You were furious that I had the temerity, with all your guile, to actually show you a piece of who you are that you're committed to not seeing. That's the pattern. And it's not an easy one to face. And it's even harder when you've got friends invested in your charm, in your presence, in your friendship, that are willing to bolster your delusions in order to maintain the relationship, in order to maintain the facade that there's no crack in the foundation of Hai going on, for this to be present at the very top of an organization. For someone to be sold out to this degree, this persistently for 12 years, is a cut to the root and the soul of the energy and the mission of love, intimacy, and sexuality, of healthy relationship, of trust and trustworthiness of the mission statement. This is a cut to the soul. And it's not personal. I don't take this personally. It's a very rare circumstance that brought you to an unusual situation where you had to decide between protecting your shadow and risking the reputation of your organization. Between protecting your shadow and caring and loving a participant. And we all love. And we all love loving. And we all give. And we all love giving. And we all protect the innocent sometimes. Because when it's out in public, when it's easy, it's wonderful. We get social kudos, feels good, it's wonderful. But the question becomes, what happens behind closed doors when someone desperately needs you to be trained, ethical, and loving? But to do so, you have to face your inadequacy, your terror, your dread, your shame, and you have to get help. But if you just sell the patient, if you just let go of the rope and let them fall, and that's out of mind, we don't have to confront the self. The next wave of trauma and grief happened when I realized all of this for the first time. There's a way that when your safety net, like when a child is dependent upon a parent and a family structure, usually the parent has a bit of a contract. You cannot talk about my faults in this area. Is that okay? Okay, sign here. You can now be a part of this family. If the child is getting enough of their needs met, they'll go along with the contract. Okay, we'll all pretend that mom's a great mom here, she's a great cook, she's a great house cleaner. Who's the best house cleaner? Mom. We'll all go along with that. The fact that we're getting sick, there's slime growing in on the walls, well, we know what we have to do here. But when you get abused, when you get lied to, when you see other people you care about being abused and lied to, the contract gets weak. Wait a minute. I'm no longer going to hide your secret. I'm no longer going to pretend that your food is better than everyone else's when it's the worst food I've tasted. I'm no longer going to pretend that I feel deeply loved and supported when in fact I feel terrified half the time, and I'm lonely and I'm waiting here. I'm no longer going to pretend that. This is an exciting moment. It's a truth-telling moment when one person can face their shadow and one person can examine the truth of their own experience with sanity for the first time. To break. And as the betrayal thickened and deepened, as the walls got inset, as it was clear that nothing I said would make any difference, I started listing all the things that were wrong about this, creating, this is a joke. And I wrote a document, and I shared it in confidence with Anne, because Anne was the designated confidence person. I said I wanted to talk about it. She broke the confidence, and after telling me constantly, don't talk to Jason, he's really busy. That's the head of High, who ought to be dealing with something like this. Don't talk to Jason. She then sends him a 30-page document that I had clawed my way through writing to try and stay sane. I'm being fed so much pressure to not see what's going on that I feel I'm caving in and I'm going insane. And so I'm writing this document about what's going on, and I send it to Anne. I said, I'm getting worse here. Since this help is happening, I'm getting worse. I'm getting sicker, this and that is happening. This is a nightmare. I don't see how you as an organization can possibly hold this line that this is not a high issue. You are becoming criminally negligent by the day. By every day you don't get help and I'm getting worse. See, and what happened as soon as she broke confidence and shared this with Jason, after telling me I shouldn't write to Jason, is suddenly her help doubled. And I felt held for the first time in this whole process. So things stabilized. Once things stabilized with Anne, and once she realized that I held in my hands the possibility of jeopardizing her baby, her organization, she pivoted from being willing to let me go down to being willing to let Peter go down. So Peter is not getting support in the way he needs in this time. This is a traumatic event. Peter has no experience going through this before. And they're trying to do the whole thing under wraps. They obviously don't know what they're doing, or they'd have trained Peter better. So this is the incompetent trying to navigate the incompetent. So I go from being the sacrificial lamb to Peter is. But I'm not okay with that. You don't abuse and abandon the person you've trained and chosen because you didn't train and choose them well. And I don't believe Peter is an evil person. I think he's a human person. And that, if anything, he's a little bit more naive than most because he's doing what all these other facilitators are doing, more with less caution. He's why not? Let's give it a try. I mean, that's kind of Peter's attitude. If let's give it a try. And then he runs away if it doesn't work, or he doesn't know what to do. But he's probably the only facilitator that, if I'd asked that question, would have said yes, let alone yes because it's easy. That's how I know it's a good idea. And Sarah would never have gone along with that. Because she's, whether she's more afraid for Hai or more afraid for me, it doesn't matter. She's more cautious and concerned, like what could go wrong in this and that. And you do need to be responsible for that. But and then Peter starts getting the heat. And after complaining to me, Anne had complained to me before this happened that I should be paying for her time, because this was all my stuff, that Peter shouldn't have to be paying her, because Peter started paying her at some point to be this liaison. And I'm completely aware that I'm not wanted. This is not a welcome problem for Hai. This is not a welcome problem for Peter. This is not a welcome problem for Anne. They don't want to be dealing with this. Nor do they see it as their problem. They're not processing this as their lack of training, their lack of protocol, their lack of skill, their lack of ethics, their lack of legal, efficacy or anything. They're processing this as Dane's creating problems. I'm not going to trust him again. He's so untrustworthy. That's, oh gosh, why does he have to create problems at this moment? They're complete victims in this dynamic. So of course they're not apologizing, they're not including me, they're doing what they have to do. And when I commented to Peter that, it feels miserable because I feel like this is blackmail. You're only giving this stuff to me because you have to, because I've got you on tape. It feels miserable. It feels absolutely miserable. And I hated being in that role. And Peter said, yes, it does feel like blackmail. Just cut it out. Stop blackmailing us. And here's the joke. So, it's like one wave after another is being put on the participant who can't get their needs met in any other way but upping the ante. It's like, what do you do when you've had the most profound experience of your life and you need to integrate it? And the way you integrate it is by talking, and the one person you've hired and who shared that experience is the one person who won't talk about it, and who will go as far as shaming you and avoiding you and controlling communication and rejecting this and rejecting that and saying wait a couple of months. I've never done that kind of protocol in my life, but I did it for him. As usual, the pattern completing. First he wanted me to have a sexual relationship with him in the way that was convenient for him, even if that meant me having to join and be on team. And when I started talking in front of the group, because I learned, I'm highly sensitive. Elaine Aron's book, The Highly Sensitive Person, not learned it high, but thank heavens I learned it. That I have Asperger's tendency, and I started talking about this and how Peter argued with me. He said, no, you don't have Asperger's. You don't have anything. You don't have an issue here. He said, I know you. You're amazing. So not only did he not ask any of the questions that would help him see what I was dealing with, when I told him and everyone in the room, he was the only one in the room that came up to me. And rather than saying, thanks for telling, what do you need? Gosh, I wish I had asked you about that and learned that, 8 years ago. He comes up and he says, nah, I disagree with Anne. You don't have this. So what do you do when your therapist, when your healer is so thick and so sick and so ignorant about what they are ignorant about, that far from helping you diagnose your challenge, they actually deny what they never took the time to diagnose, when they add to the level of insanity rather than lifting it. And this would make sense, because someone who has a pathology they don't want to admit, that they're in denial of, generally treats other people the way they treat themselves. So let's all agree that nobody has any pathologies. I don't have any, I'm wonderful, so you're wonderful too. The trouble is that whether you say we're wonderful or we're not wonderful, I still can't sleep with someone in the way that most people can sleep with someone. I still can't be touched in the way that most people can be touched. Attacks in the first waves and first hours of relationship that only stabilize if I hold it in a certain way. And knowing what that way is and sharing that with my partner is the difference between some extraordinary high growth moments in a very healthy relationship and a disaster that has no chance of winning. So it doesn't matter what you call it. It doesn't matter if you call it a strength. It doesn't matter if you call it a weakness. It doesn't matter if you call it both. It doesn't matter if you call it hubba gooba. What matters is that people understand your limitations and how to bring out the best in you. That's what matters to every single human being. Because when we understand our limitations, our boundaries, and how to bring out the best in one another, we have wonderful experiences. And when we unconsciously do everything that sets each other up for failure and bring out the worst in each other, starting with Peter being late for our first appointment and not even having the courtesy to communicate that he will be late at the most profound and overwhelming moment of any therapy session in my life. When you don't realize and don't respect the fact that those 20 minutes may have cost us the relationship, but Peter didn't care enough to ask the questions to learn about those 20 minutes. And why would he if he's denying that there's anything wrong or different about me? Why would he take the time to find out what it is? But how sick is it when participants within his workshops show more care and consideration than he does by a long shot? Why isn't he learning from them rather than putting himself forward as the teacher who is so omnipotent that he doesn't have any blind spots and doesn't want to learn and doesn't need to learn? Why isn't he putting the chance to learn from the many people who have so much to teach him, including the fact, if he doesn't know it, that even with all of his mistakes and blind spots, he's still a lovable person. He's still worthy of love and respect, just like any other human being. But it becomes very hard to do that in a setup where one is asked to take time, money, and risk to be lied to be betrayed, to be hurt deeply, and abandoned in one's most vulnerable positions and then be blamed for it. That's a hard thing for a human being to say, that's someone I can get closer to. As the layers of loyalty stripped away, one by one, as I saw that I was hung out to dry, and that basically Peter was following the high protocol, I thought, I shouldn't be surprised. Peter has learned from these folks. What he's done that has hurt me is what they're now doing to hurt me. This isn't Peter's issue. This is definitely a high issue. I asked for an apology from Peter and from all of the high facilitators. And I listed 12 things, 12 areas they had each hurt me to varying degrees and had enormous negative impact, independent of their intention, independent of their mission statement. I was in more pain, more loneliness, more shame, more isolation, more fatigue, more exhaustion, more overwhelm, and less secure in my ability to cope than I had ever been in my life by a factor of 5. And this had erupted directly after asking them for help, precisely because of how they had not helped me, how they had disowned me and the issue, how they had not included me, how they had excluded me, which was part of the wound. So they're upping the wound, but it's now 9 of them. It's now devastating the possibility to have any relationship with this community, because they're always there. And one of the things you learn, see, because until you're betrayed deeply within a community or cult-like structure or a family structure, it doesn't matter what it is, when you have deep bonds, when you are getting your need for belonging met within an organization, within a group, within a community, you experience the trauma of life-threatening threat if you do not get that need met by that organization anymore. You experience the trauma of being alone, of being on the outside of community. Now, our need for belonging is so strong, and the trauma is such a big deal, that we don't let go easily. It takes intense trauma that is louder than the trauma of losing one's community before one will break loyalty. However, I mean, if you watch the documentary about the, what's that American religion, eluding me, Travolta and one of the other actors, socialites or whatever. It's a remarkable story. But if you watch that documentary, let me just look it up. So it's Scientology, and if you look at some of the YouTube documentaries and finally, after massive suppression, so you have Scientology doing a massive attack campaign at anyone threatening to reveal what they're upset, what their secrets, their protocols, their shadow. But what's interesting to me is, like with high, there is a core technology that has been very helpful. So Ron Hubbard's early technology and stuff helped people. Ron Hubbard had a lot of mental emotional disease and was quite afraid of himself at times and projected that paranoia outside. This is actually an example. No one cared enough about Ron Hubbard or the world to really see that he got help, to really look at what dimensions he was operating in. He might have been in a healthier, more scientifically organized culture around psychology. He might have been a wonderful shaman. Had people cared enough about him and the culture and all the people he could influence to actually take a stand for the little boy in there who's trying to figure out what to do with all these visions, with all these memories, with all this pain, with all this hurt. And he's doing his best to cope with all this. And, it just so happened, like many, leaders that accrue power and are not healthy, whether it's Saddam Hussein or Hitler or Ron Hubbard, that he's able to do it in a way that nobody challenges and nobody can really confront him. It's defended, that his wound is defended from healing, and no one's caring enough about him or the culture to intervene. The movie does a great job of exploring the extent of loyalty, that people will betray themselves and their own families, their own children, to enormous brutality in order to protect their own need to belong to something consistent with their ideals. So you've got idealism and belonging combined, several of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've got your community. If you add to that the element of attack, of knowing that if you leave, you are now the enemy, and that Scientology will stop at nothing to add to your addiction, to this, that, and the other, that's fair game within their own philosophy, you have a very powerful recipe for insane adherence to the protocol. Now, High has a very valuable technology. It has helped more than it has hurt, I believe, a lot of people. And it has hurt people with its blind spots, with its inadequacies, with setting people up to fail and then implying that those people were at choice as opposed to they weren't given the technology. You don't give someone flu medicine when they've got gangrene and say, you're at choice, get better. You realize that if you've given flu medicine to a few gangrene patients and it's not working, or first of all, you realize you don't know what the hell you're doing. You can't confuse the two, and you got to do proper training. And then you care enough to do that training, to acknowledge your limitations and to grow in that area. And I've seen High do this beautifully. But one of the things that I realized, which happened with my siblings, was that my parents had traumatized my siblings to such a degree, including blaming them for all the things they had induced. And, with so much volatility, a child clings to some sense of certainty, and that, in this case, was the family identity. And it's not safe for a child to say, my father's insane or sociopathic, my mother is out to lunch, in that condition. So the child actually defends the parent against criticism and defends the right to stay with the parent, because the parent is meeting the need for belonging and the need for identity. And High does this in ways that are not done in any other community that I've been in. Like, I've been to the Findhorn community in Scotland. It's a great community. I've been to the Hoathley Hill community in Sussex, England. I've been around the Lazarus community and stuff. There is no community that has as much inclusion and need for belonging in a number of love languages, which touch is an important one, the way High does, which means the loss of the High community is a loss of identity. It's not replaceable outside of the community in the same way. So there's a loss of self, there's a loss of identity, there's a loss of one's need to belong, there's a loss of one's feeling of safety. So for me to confront that I'm not safe, that my facilitators, when it comes right down to it, don't understand enough, don't have the training, don't have the ethical commitment, don't have the resources to put my well-being first, that their fears about their reputation and organization are trumping their human commitment to me winning and my well-being, that they won't even make the time to fully unpack the system, that they've offloaded me as not their stuff, rather than taken on the challenge to grow and actually live up to their commitment to everyone winning. It's a terrifying experience and easy to obscure. It's kind of the same experience that when you leave a relationship in which you've had an addictive sexual relationship and all of that, it's very, there's this kind of, he's an angel, now he's terrible. It's like, as long as there was a chance of meeting the addictive energy and the basic human needs and stuff, we'll pretend there's nothing wrong. As soon as that's out, as soon as he's off with another woman or hasn't chosen me number one or is not going to marry me, then, well, all the faults get exaggerated and I want nothing to do with them. It's this black or white dynamic. And of course the challenge is to actually see the beauty, to see the health, to understand the dynamic, to understand that to talk about this with anyone who's meeting their needs effectively, who hasn't been sexually propositioned by their therapist, who hasn't had my lifetime of trauma, who has not taken psychedelics with a facilitator, who has not fallen in love with a facilitator, who has not had any of these things and has not had these particular traumas. And this community is more communicative, more warmer. It's a great thing. And our mind doesn't like complexity. Our mind does not like, my facilitator can be trusted in front of the room, but I may not be safe with him one-on-one. My facilitator can be trusted in public, but not in private. My facilitator can be trusted to care for me and do their best as long as it doesn't tarnish their reputation. My facilitator can be trusted to tell the truth as long as it's not the truth about their own shadow. My facilitator can be trusted to make amends as long as it's under legal threat. And in this situation and to this degree, it's a much more upsetting, complex thing that takes away the trust. It's like I can't just say, I'm in the room of love, which is the room for the High workshop. I can't say, I'm in the room of love, I'm safe, which is a wonderful thing if you can do that. Particularly if you don't have discernment and skills in a culture that hasn't taught you that. It's great to just kind of, everyone loves me, hooray, I'll just be safe here, and out in the world I'll just hide and avoid and then open up again at a High workshop or a support group. And that space needs to be kept safe. Now, High probably feels that it is kept safe by keeping this stuff secret. I feel quite the opposite. I feel that it's kept safe by knowing that we can trust one another in the community to speak up and challenge High to grow and live its talk, number one. That we can trust the community to care for one another when we do speak out. That we can trust that we're not alone and someone's not going to pretend that it's all love and stuff and hide the areas they're being abused so that we can't help them. And that we can't trust the complexity of that this is wrong and amends need to be made, but that doesn't mean that we're fundamentally, that Peter's a fundamentally bad person, or, what this and that and the other. It may mean that there needs to be more training. It may mean that a conversation has to begin. But something is very wrong if a participant is sold out in a time of suicidal crisis to protect an organization and a facilitator's delusional self-image in an area of incompetence. There's something very wrong there. It's wrong for the community, it's wrong for me, it's wrong for High. And the trouble is that's not going to change with a posture of this isn't our stuff. We didn't do it, we didn't do it. It's going to change when we say we all did this. Maybe there's other participants who haven't spoken up. Maybe maybe all the therapists who didn't tell me what PTSD was and that I had it and stuff. Maybe we didn't ask the right questionnaire. We didn't ask. It's not one person's fault. If there is shame present, if someone is hurt, if something wrong happens, to one degree or another, everyone in that environment is a part of that, to one degree or another. Allowing it, permitting it, causing it, teaching it, modeling it, not speaking up against it, being too busy to care, prioritizing, TV commercial acquisitions ahead of heart acquisitions, I've had girlfriends tell me they don't have enough money to be in this relationship. And it's like, why? How do you spend their money? Well, I've got my hairdo, that's $70 a month. I've got my nails, that's $60 a month. I've got this, I've got that. So that's all more important than the relationship. Yeah. Okay, well then you've got your priorities straight. Go do your nails and all that. And I'll find a woman. I don't want someone with nails. I don't want someone with this. I hate this whole fanatical obsession with looks. I don't care what the body type is. I want a human being who can talk, who can prioritize, who will be vulnerable, who can connect, who can love and be loved. That's what I want. So I'm sure there's some guy who will love to long, to admire you from a distance with all your hair, but you don't have time for them. You're busy with all this stuff. So we're participants in this culture. And I'm looking at how I can go AWOL and still function. It's a big challenge. We're born as children into our parents' culture, and we don't become an adult until we throw off our culture, our dictated religion, thou shalt love thy parents, our cultism, our addiction, and our family patterns, and decide, who am I? And this is my big crisis. This is the thing that can be worth living for to the degree that I can succeed. But I don't need that job made harder by keeping other people's secrets, by lying, by being asked to lie, by being asked to take abuse and then to be shoved out the door as if I have no value, as if I don't matter. That's the message. When 9 leaders of your community who say they love you and committed to you winning and all this push you out the door with legalized statements, I asked them for an apology. They ignored it. I asked for an apology again, and I threatened to hold them personally responsible for all the healthcare costs I was racking up. I'm flat on my back for 2 months because my adrenals, which are already exhausted from suppressing all this childhood trauma that has not been dealt with in all this therapeutic work and energy work that I've done, is confusing me because I'm being deluded by a culture that's looking at my lifestyle and saying, you're a winner, you've made it. And I'm saying, don't you care about how my body feels, what's happening inside, and my emotions, my depression, my waves of wanting to die? How is it that your definition of making it has nothing to do with how I feel? That you don't even ask how I feel, that you don't even want to know when you do ask. You just want to stick me on a pedestal. This is insane. I haven't made it. I've arrived at this culture's definition of success and found it empty and a joke. And then I'm left realizing, well, I guess, foolish me for believing everyone around me. Foolish me for expecting my therapist to actually know what they're doing. Foolish me for believing all the people that told me that I wasn't being abused and that my parents were wonderful people. And foolish me for ignoring my body for 40 years because that's the one part that is exploding with information that nobody wants to hear. No one has the skill to discern, and that everyone wants to treat with a quick fix. Oh, you need the raw food diet. Oh, you need to eat more organic food. Oh, you need to drink this kind of tea. And all your childhood traumas just disappear. Well, just do it. It worked for me. This is the joke. This is the betrayal. So, my trauma exploded again when, in response to asking all of the high facilitators to apologize, because I felt more wronged than I felt with my parents. My parents hadn't taken my money and promised to teach me about love, intimacy, and sexuality and healthy relating. But these folks had. These folks were putting themselves as teachers, and I was getting sick following their protocol. And they weren't even attuning to that data. I told them I'm getting sick. No response. I told you that my pain is getting worse. No response. We do what we do independent of you. That's a sociopathic protocol, and it's terrifying to depend and need people in that state. So I asked for an apology. No, nothing. I said, I am going to sue all of you for my legal costs. And, my health costs, basically. I'm flat on my back, I'm not working, I'm this, I'm that. This is what's happening as a result of trusting this organization and asking you for help. And you're more concerned about keeping this a secret than helping me out. I am not getting what I need at all. And I want an apology. And I want an apology for this and this and this and this and this. You know what they wrote back? It was the same kind of legalized thing that looked like the first paragraph when they'd responded. Dear Dane, we are sorry that you had such a difficult childhood, and we wish you all the best. Are you asking me to be crazy as well? Are you asking me to believe? I'm not asking you to apologize for my childhood abuse. That has nothing to do with you. But how about an apology for something? Some of your impact. I'm not asking you to apologize for wishing me well. I'm not asking you to apologize for the things that you've done well. I'm not asking you to apologize for anything other than your impact by doing and not doing things. And there's 100 things you've done and not done. And I've gotten hurt as a result of trusting you. Zip. It's a joke. It's a joke. It's a joke. And one of the saddest things for me was when I started learning. See, around this time, after Anne had left me to go to a workshop, and when I couldn't cope, I'm desperately fumbling around. I go into my health food store. There's a young man. I ask if I can sit with him. He says, sure. I said, what's exciting in your life? He says, I'm going to a trauma workshop. I said, what's trauma? And he said, well, it's when you get overwhelmed and It's stuff that gets stuck in your body and a light goes off. And I say, oh, that's really interesting. Why are you doing that? Well, I have this childhood and this and that and the other. It's like, oh, a light goes off. That's me. I have got to find something that works better than what's happening here. So within 10 minutes of hearing this, I buy the book. So I'm learning what trauma is for the first time in my life at 40 years old from a stranger in a health food store after 40 years of ignorance. After $250,000 of professional help, I'm learning what I need to know from a stranger in a health food store. After spending 60% of my whole life energy coping with this, while my advocate is off teaching a workshop on love, intimacy, and sexuality. And so I read that book and I start applying it. It works. Anne is not there. I figure out how to do one of these exercises. I'm so relieved that there's some hope. I'm not just endlessly going downhill in a helpless state without support. There's hope. And so I start looking and I get another book and I stumble across one book and I read this book in a couple of days and do all the exercise, and then I'm on to all the other books about trauma in the body and this and that and the other, and it's a huge doorway. I read a book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. It's brilliant. I recommend it to the high facilitators. Peter says his teacher had recommended it to him also. He hadn't read it. And I again say, this is a big deal. This is what I've been dealing with you, with everyone in high. I've had team members say that I don't know how to cope with this. You need to introduce this to participants and the team so that they can cope with high. And Jason says, trauma isn't our thing. It's not our thing. We teach workshops on love, intimacy, and sexuality. We're committed to a world in which everyone wins. But that commitment doesn't go so far as to include knowledge about the primary reason so many people are losing. Traumatic memory, trauma stuck in the body, trauma leading to addictive behavior. We're committed to everyone winning, but we're not committed to teaching people why they're not winning. It's not a very big commitment. And here's the blind spot protecting the blind spot of the blind spot. So what the high facilitators don't seem to realize is they are reacting in a traumatic state, in a traumatized state, to life-threatening information. This is jeopardizing their careers. I mean, do you want to do work with Peter Sandhill knowing that this is how he will treat you at the present state? That he's never made amends? That he feels like the victim? Do you want to do work with him? I don't. I don't feel safe to do that. I don't have anything against Peter. But I want him to do his work to a point where he would never treat someone like this again. I want him to do his work, to do his blind spot. I want High, the organization, to do their work, to show themselves their own blind spot and each other's blind spots. And I want their commitment to seeing and supporting each other in their blind spots to be stronger than their commitment to organizational preservation at the expense of participants, because that's an organization worthy of trust. And we need organizations worthy of trust. We need communities worthy of trust. We need teachers and we need facilitators and we need therapists worthy of our trust. We need that. So I want them to become that. I want them to be excited about an opportunity to do that. But how can that happen if the head of high first denies that this has anything to do with high, and then, without helping the person hurt by organizational protocol, who just stumbles into and averts a disaster by learning about trauma themselves and saying, hey guys, you could learn about this and you can introduce this to the team and you can say a few words, you can have it in the handout, you can help a lot. Yeah, that's not really our thing. It's not really our thing. We'll take your money. We'll say that you're at choice. But that's just the thing. You're not at choice when you have trauma. When you have unresolved trauma, anyone can trigger you. And you're not at choice about whether or not you're triggered. So it's a lie. It's a shame. It's a shame. It's saying that because we don't want to learn about trauma, because we don't know about trauma, because we don't want the legal liability of saying something that could be shown as not quite right or not as thorough as it could be, we don't want to tell you about trauma. But we're going to shame you by holding you responsible. It's not our choice. We are not at choice to tell you about trauma or not to tell you. It's like saying, anyone can swim across the river. Here's the breaststroke. And someone says, well, look at those big alligators that come and are eating a third of the people along the way. Well, that's not really our concern. We're just here to teach you to swim across the river. Yeah, but a third of the people aren't making it. They're being eaten by alligators. And you're not teaching us that there are alligators. And you're not teaching us how they bite. And you're not teaching us how to defend ourselves. And you're not killing the alligators. Yeah, it's not really our thing. We're committed to helping you cross that river. And you're at choice. You can either dive in and cross the river or not. But you're not at choice about whether or not you're eaten by an alligator you don't even know is there. You're not at choice to go shoot the alligators. You're not at choice to get a wetsuit with alligator repellent stuff if you don't even know they're there. You can't prepare. You can't take care of yourself if you don't have the vocabulary, if you don't have the language. This is just very basic stuff. And when I'm in the most agony I've ever been in, watching the flippancy with which this is disowned, and looking at the level of self-loathing, what kind of organization torments a client in a situation where the organization is criminally negligent up and down the line, from not having licenses, What kind of organization does that? And acknowledges that, the person has recording and stuff and all this email stuff. It's not a self-loving situation. The high facilitators did not love themselves to understand their own importance, their own significance, and to train accordingly, and to set up safety nets, and to ask for help, and to uphold their own agreements and protocols, to train each other, to get to know one another, to be there for one another, and create a safe place for a participant and a client. And so everyone suffers. Everyone suffers. And that's the heartache around this. That's the heartache. If high goes down because of this, because this is just one too many blind spots in a culture that already devalues emotion, making it harder for them to get resources, which is part of where that scarcity comes in. If high goes down over this, the world loses, the country loses a safe place, at least in the workshop setting. And no one wins. There's only one response, and this has been my proposition to Jason and Hive from day one. You can't suppress a dirty secret. You can only create a palatable, humane, understandable ending which people can understand. Now, we nationally have not done that with Julian Assange or Citizen4. We haven't apologized to our country for spying on them, for lying to them, for destroying our corporations, for putting dongles inside our iPhones with the Vault 7 expose, spending our tax monies to invade our iPhones with spyware, and then losing the code so that the criminal industry can now hack into iPhones more easily than if our government hadn't done that. There's no apology, there's outrage. How dare Julian Assange expose our incompetence? And this has got to change. This is profoundly disgusting. It's profoundly disgusting to be attacking the information and the bearer of information that is the potential for our healing. So how does this add up? I've never been met with by the group of facilitators, despite asking for that. I was not invited to the first meeting. I wasn't invited to meet with any of the board when they made their decisions about Peter. I was told this isn't even a high issue, so I shouldn't be talking to them. Who should I be talking to? The media? The police? I mean, this is absurd. Many of my emails were not read. Most were ignored. And then one day, I have not written online throughout this entire period, in part because I really hoped for the organization they'd clean up their act. I kept saying, you can't suppress this. No one agrees with your position that this is not a high issue. No one. If you think that someone can listen to all that has gone on here and have no impact on their feeling, thought, and decisions about their relationship with a high organization, then show me that person, because I do not believe there is that person. And if you don't care, if your concern is not the ethics and well-being of your facilitators and your clients, then what is your concern? And if you don't care about the fact that your primary resource and asset is trust, because without trust you can't grow, and you're marketing yourself as a growth organization, if you're not protecting your core asset, which is trustworthiness, what is a high issue? Just teaching workshops that nobody wants to come to because they don't trust you? Teaching love when people feel hurt by you? What is a high issue more than this? That's just completely ignored. Jason and no one else has ever responded to that. I wrote to the board. I said, I want an apology. The board said, I don't think you're going to get it. I said, this is a joke. The board member said he was crying, but that's the best he could do. Is this a board doing its job? At some point along the line here, I realized that I'm getting more triggered by needing these people. And I also, see, Peter obscured the data set from me for 6 months. He hid so well that I couldn't get an accurate pattern sample to be absolutely sure what was going on. And when you're in love with someone and you've had this peak experience of your life and what's going on is really disgusting, there's part of you that doesn't want to know. There's a part of me that was complicit in that lie by allowing Peter to do all this evasive stuff for 6 months. And it was a part of my pleaser, trying to please him, the lover. You know, that's part of any lover dynamic. You want to please your lover. And so I'm trying to please and accommodate Peter. And Peter's trying to please and accommodate himself. And so we're both trying to, enable Peter's coping mechanism, which is destroying my well-being. It's the opposite of what I needed. And that's one reason there are these boundaries for therapists, not to break the container, but to be there as a safe resource for your client, to keep the lines clean, that they can learn and grow and you're always there for them, that they've got a safety net in you. Well, I've lost my safety net. Peter was unable to hold the container in any kind of a healthy way. In both waves over a 10-year period. He broke his agreements, and in doing so, terrified himself and me and broke the container. And when I went to his peers in high, they broke the container by disowning it, refusing to contain the process for me in the way that I asked for. No holding, no listening, no help. And this just escalates the trauma up and up and up, because now I'm looking at losing my entire community. My safest place on this planet has been jeopardized by Peter's lack of training. A lack of training that every facilitator participated in. That every facilitator recommended. And so I've been hurt, lost my support person, lost my opportunity to integrate. Had an explosion of terror. The childhood issues did come to light with all of this, this massive mushroom dose and MDMA and all that. The channeling and the thing came to light, but with that light, it shines on a very ugly pattern. It reminds me of what I went through as a child. And rather than being there for me and loving me as I relive and really examine and see for the first time just how much self-loathing and self-hate was in my parents, and just how much of that I bore the brunt of. I was abandoned because Peter loathed and hated himself, and I was left to deal with my parents and me in a very new experience. The altered state, it needs profound respect and profound love and skill to navigate that terrain. And I didn't have it, and Peter didn't have it, and my first sitter didn't have it. So I'm all alone again in a culture that leaves me to experiment at my own cost to try and get well from the wounds inflicted on me by a culture that doesn't care about its people enough to learn the science of well-being. We don't have scientists studying the Thoe and how can we take what they're learning. We don't have people studying the Greeks and how can we bring their traumatic stuff. And this is just fringe stuff way out in the middle of nowhere. Our mainstream culture is not concerned with that. And so you and I are left in this state of crisis and loneliness, of shame, of terror, fear, knowing we may be punished if we speak up. 1% of us facing death if we don't, through disease, through our own bodies erupting, unwilling to keep holding the toxins we keep pressing down, to keep holding on to the feelings. We must suppress for our sense of the way things are to survive, because we can't believe in this is the way things are when all those feelings erupt and we realize there's no connection. We've been told, we've been commanded to feel this way, but it's not how we feel. It's not the feelings stored in our body. So as I come through this wound, I spent, I worked with 3 healers after this. I had another wave of betrayal, as I mentioned, the shaman who I've spent, $100,000 worth over 10 years, who's been with me, up to 6 hours a week, and through all this, as all this is happening, never asking the question, never doing the stuff. His wife's a psychotherapist. When I started describing this stuff, he said, "Oh, that's outrageous." And I said, "I'm all alone here. Not a single person is advocating for me, and they're denying that this is even a high issue. I feel completely hung out to dry." And he said, "That's outrageous." I said, "It is. Why don't you help them come to their senses? Why don't you write to them what you've just said to me? Your wife's a psychotherapist. It's perfectly obvious this is out of line. I'm paying the price for it. I'm paying you to deal with the mess that came up with Peter." He said, "I don't want to do that." I said, "Why not? You said it was outrageous. Don't you take a stand for anything?" Here's my concern. If I write that letter, they're going to know who I am. These don't sound like good people. Now, I know people, and some of those people are going to want to take revenge on me. So I don't want to say anything, because I don't want to be attacked. I see. So you're my one support person. You're my one person who's acknowledging this is outrageous. You're the only person I can go to, because I have been hurt so much by these people that the idea of going through another dance with a new therapist at this stage of vulnerability, with all the games I've been through with therapists, is so upsetting that I'm either going to be alone or I'm going to be with you. And you, as my one advocate, who's saying this is outrageous, don't want to take any kind of a public stand, because they might know who you are and say something nasty to you, slash your tires, what is it? Well, something like that. I see. Well, thanks for nothing. Thanks for reminding me how alone an individual is in this culture when they're being abused. Because you're no different from the teachers and the parents who saw the dark side of my parents, and they wouldn't even tell me what they saw. They were happy for me to go insane. They were happy for me to think of that as love. Why? Because parents like that might take retaliatory action, might actually rebel. And then they might be uncomfortable. They might be scared sleeping at night rather than me going to bed lonely and wetting my bed in terror and this and that and the other. They might be doing that. Well, we can't have that. Let's just leave it to the child. Let's put the virgin princess out on the rock for the dragon to protect the staid, hollow structures of our town from the rage and the dread of the dragon. and let's shred our souls to bits. When I saw that I could not depend on any of the high facilitators to take a stand, to validate the obvious, and that I was getting worked up and re-traumatized and flat on my back and sick, when I saw that the dynamic was set up in a way that for every unit of well-being I secured by hanging in there in this dialogue, I got 2 to 3 units of toxin. So it's like earning $1 that costs you $3 to earn it. And you can't change that dynamic. It takes a certain amount of energy with a recalcitrant body of people in denial, in overwhelming stuff. I had to repeat myself up to 5 times, some of which stuff has still been completely ignored. Like, why isn't this a high issue? Jason never responded. It just isn't. That's all there is to it. I wrote about it 3 times. How many times you keep writing about it? It's like, please, don't go down in history this way. I'm not going to lie to cover you when you can't even have the decency to apologize for something this obvious. You are a danger to yourselves and other people, and you can't do your mission until you realize it. And if you can't realize it because of character, because of training, because of ethics, and because of humanity, and because of empathy, and because of love, you have to realize it because of fear. But I am not your threat. I am your ally. I've taken 30 of your workshops. I've hired 3 of you. I've recommended. There have been more than 150 workshops filled because of me. I've appreciated you in my books, and I've donated several $1,000s. And my price for that is being treated well and having the truth honored and having amends made when I've been hurt inadvertently. That is the price. If you don't want to pay it, if you want to turn me into the enemy, you are your own worst enemy. How can you survive that mentality? And I said this directly. No response. This is, I just tear my hair out trying to figure out what's going on in behind these closed doors, because I've never been invited to a meeting. When the apology was ignored and I realized I've been hurt more than I've ever been hurt, and it's not even going to be honored. It's a joke. It's like if you're twisting someone's arm, at some point they're going to say anything. But when you've been betrayed and lied to, when you've been hurt, do you want to be in that dynamic? Where you're just being hated because you're twisting their arm and they don't even get it? It's not fun. It's not fun. So this is the kind of withdrawal point, one of the things I'd asked Peter for. Because there were numerous barbs along the way in this whole journey. One of them was Peter's repeated assertion. He made this comment 4 times over a 6-month period. He said, Dane, I'm really clear that this has nothing to do with me. This is all your stuff. Amazing. So, that's, and he never unsaid that. He said, I'm never going to trust you again for this whole lifetime. He never initiated or volunteered an apology. He apologized once when I spelled out everything I wanted to apologize, and he apologized for exactly that. It was quite an impressive performance and humility that he did apologize for all of that. But my assertion is that this is not just Peter. That because of the legal threat and all that, Peter is being hung out as the scapegoat. But no good leader hangs their employees out as the scapegoat if they've done a poor job training them. That's not right. The protocol has to shift. The pattern has to shift. The pattern of training, the pattern of closed-door meetings, the pattern of isolating facilitators from participants, the pattern that started 10 years ago with the 6-month process of ignoring my letter, which discussed these very patterns. That's what needs to be addressed for HI's well-being, for the well-being of participants, for the well-being of the organization, for my well-being. And if you got to spend $1 on the bus and $1 for lunch, $1 to get home again, and you do your day work and you get $1 every day, you're $2 behind. And the amount of stress my body was going through with this 6-month process with the facilitators was far greater than the amount of stress relieved by the occasional acknowledgement or reply or apology from Peter, not from the other facilitators. So that's one frustration, is watching. I'm going down every day that I'm in this. I'm getting saner, I'm getting clearer about what's going on, and I'm clearer that this is not my issue, which is a very, very big deal. But my energy is going down. I'm not getting the support. I'm not feeling loved. I'm becoming more volatile emotionally because I'm more drained and I'm more intolerant to yet one more runaround and lie. I'm spending $3 to get one. You can't win in a dynamic like that. So I withdrew right after Peter had, for the 5th time, I'd said, I need a container from you. I am in traumatic terrain, and in the same way I need, someone to show up within 10 minutes of showing up. I need to know when you're going to reply to this, and I need to know these things with certainty. And whatever that is, I just need the certainty. So when you get my email, say, I've read your email, and then tell me when you will reply by, and honor that time. That was the container that I requested to go through some of my deepest work about being rewounded by the organization after asking for help. And he dropped that 5 different times. And the last time he dropped it, I was so upset because every single time I repeat myself, so this was 5 times, I just feel like I'm the least important thing in this whole process. I'm the only thing that doesn't matter here. Their reputation matters, their secret matters, their convenience matters, saying what they have to say, denying that it's any of them. This all matters to them. Carrying on with their daily life matters, but I'm spending tens of thousands of dollars to be betrayed, and they can't even hold it together to keep an agreement as simple as a boundary. The very first boundary Peter broke, to be 20 minutes late for our first support session, after the biggest experience of my life, is happening again and again and again. And at some point, it's more fool me for staying in the process. And so I already had secured an assistant by when they weren't showing up in any way. In this whole process, no one came to listen and be held and just gave me what I needed in the time frame that I needed. In fact, I heard from Anne that I was spending too much of Peter's money. See, and this is the insult of it. Peter told me about his 3 family vacations while he was too busy to communicate to me. And he told me about his office remodel, which was mostly painting. Talked about spending $16,000 to repaint his office in all these beautiful orange colors. Wonderful. In this entire process, under great duress, martyrhood, resentment, and you've betrayed me, Peter paid Ann Watts $5,000 to mostly coach him, because what would happen is, I would send Peter a recording talking about what I needed to hear and process and stuff like that. And Peter would do what he thought was a reply, ignoring certain things, and then he'd throw these barbs in. Like at one point he said, I'm completely here for you. I'm just loving, anything you need. I'm all about you. But I don't want you to do this. I don't want you to talk to me like this. I don't want you to give me percentages about how well I'm doing, and I don't want this and I don't want that. Just cut that out. And I'm like, Ann, are you hearing this? Peter is completely there for me to make amends if I will just do it in the way that's good for him. I mean, this is just normal Peter. I mean, so I'm asked to be insane. You're totally there for me, just do it all my way. And then he would say, I'm completely here from you, but I don't want you to talk to me in a recording. I want you to type out repeatedly all the things I'm forgetting. And my fingers are going numb because I'm so exhausted, because I've never been more stressed in my entire life. But if I could just stress myself out a bit more so that Peter can forget things 2 or 3 times, he would appreciate that. And then he's resentful that I refuse to do it. It's like, Ann, every single message I get that I'm the problem, that I'm the burden, that this has nothing to do with Peter, is a message of shame and abuse. It stresses me. It's exactly what's making this work. And Ann gets on the phone with Peter. Peter, you idiot, you get it together, Then Peter does a little better next time. Then he drops it, and then he adds in this is nothing. I'm just really clear, Dane. I'm letting go of all this. This has nothing to do with me. Just nothing to do with me. And then he'll carry on. It's like, Peter, it has everything to do with you. If you were trained, if you did what you said, if you were a human being, if you saw your blind spots, if you weren't in so much denial, if you didn't control the communication, if you'd apologized on your own, if you knew enough to know that what you did was off base, if you'd kept your agreements with High, if you'd kept your agreements with your wife, if you'd done any of these things, this wouldn't be happening. And those were choices that I don't have control over. And had you done any of the things that I'd asked, please, could we have this conversation? Please, can you support me like this? Please, will you help me integrate? Please, will you respond to my emails? Please, will you take money out of the relationship? Oh, no, I can't do any of that. Can't do any of that. Okay, well, then you can clean up your mess. Oh, gosh, after all I've done, this whole joke. And that was the big joke with my parents. They were absolutely silent about was, Michael, Sherilyn, these kids don't behave this way when you're not around. You lie to them, you incite them, you humiliate them, you shame them, you rile them up, you turn them against one another. Of course they're like that. But that's not who they are. That's who you are. You have created monsters out of very beautiful people, and that's a crime. They're dealing with that to this day. And you're not man enough and woman enough to own that or do anything about it. Maybe you don't know how. but it's a crime that you shame them and make them believe that this is their nature. It's not their nature. I have never raised my voice in my life except to the high facilitators. I find that amazing. 70 lovers, 40 years of dealing with trauma, never raised my voice. But being asked to carry the weight of their secret and their lies while they betrayed me, while they denied, while they hurt and undercut their own mission statement and protocol, watching the pain that I was in and how insignificant I was in their own self-absorbed process was just too much. And I wasn't strong enough to leave. See, I've always left if I'm in an unhealthy situation. But in one fell swoop, I lost my facilitator, I lost Anne, and I lost the workshops, and I lost the community. And that's when you're in deep pain and deep crisis and looking for a reason to live, and you lose all those basic needs in one go. It's too much to let go of all at once. I couldn't let go. So I'm stuck in this situation, and my pain is escalating as I carry their toxicity, their blind spot. And I realize, this is not healthy. I need help. And can you get me one of the team? Or no, we don't want to talk about this. We're not even telling the office what's going on. Well, can you help me? No, I've got to do a workshop. Can I come to the workshop? Okay, you can come to the workshop. Okay, I buy a plane ticket, sitting next to Anne so that we can maximize the time on the plane flying to the workshop. I'm going to a workshop and paying high money so that I'm not without any support. I bought a seat right next to Anne because I said, I'm coming to work around your protocol because I need help. She said, okay. Then she calls up and she says, you know, I talked with the person on team and they can't get you in the workshop. You'd ruin the gender balance. So you can't come. Okay, I guess I'll just cancel the plane ticket, be on my own. I was so upset with her. And my body couldn't stand another tantrum. So I just went silent. And that's what I eventually did with Jason as well. You know, it's just so heavy. It's so painful. The betrayal is so deep. I am so unseen in this. What I need, it's so not what I need. You're spending vast amounts of energy to make things worse because you will not listen to what I need, to what I have asked for. I made 6 direct requests to Peter over a 10-year period. And Peter denied every single one and did not offer an alternative and never volunteered a single remedy of his own. And did it in such a way that I was always left feeling like a shit. That's abuse. That's shaming. That's not healing. And the blind spot's so thick. All you need to do to really protect the blind spot is be blind that you're blind. And then say that's sight. And you're good to go. You can just sail on out happily. And that's the most dangerous part of this whole pattern. There are many, many more little nuances like this that, you know, are just outrageous. But after that happened too many times, I just had no more energy. I knew enough to know that I was dealing with insanity. And that was enough to know that I was safer disengaging. And then I'm left for the last 2 years to follow the dictates that I can find. It's very hard to find a new therapist when you've been betrayed by everyone you've trusted. And when you realize that none of $250,000 worth of work knew what they were doing at the core level. They all managed symptoms. So I would have deeply suppressed emotions, and my energy healer would clear off the layers, but would not talk about the trauma or educate me about any of that. So it's just clearing off, clearing off, clearing off, $100,000 worth of clearing off, listening. No clue. You know, and this is a wound. I feel betrayed. I don't feel safe with these people. I found one person who was very sympathetic and did EMDR, but so much of the wound in early attachment trauma is around timing and attunement. And like every good Western practitioner, she is not timed and attuned to her clients and patients. She's timed and attuned to her schedule. Would you like to see me again in 2 weeks, Tuesday at 11 a.m.? Well, I can't always wake up at 11 a.m. It depends on the day before, and I won't know this and my energy level and that and like that. Well, take it or leave it. I don't care about what you need. This is what I have. That's the essence of the sociopathic posture. Take it or leave it. This doesn't respond to you and your needs. It's like telling a plant that needs daily watering. I've got a watering schedule on Monday, the 12th, and another one on the 24th. Take it or leave it. It doesn't matter. I'll be wilted by then. Well, see you later. You can't negotiate with some of these organic patterns, particularly traumatic patterns, which are out of your control. So one session helped, and then that was the end of that. Then we did constellation therapy. It helped, so we did 12 hours. Then the therapist started losing containment as my issues got so close to the deepest wounds of their issues that I noticed that the session was being dominated by the therapist's reactions to the emotions in the areas that they had unresolved emotions. And then I noticed the guidance within the constellation scoot off, and I'd have to ask him, are you sure this is you playing the role in the constellation therapist rather than you, Peter? He'd say, oh yeah, maybe it's a bit me. And it's like, okay, you've lost it. I don't feel safe in that container. Done. No more of that. I trained an energy healer who I discovered was an energy healer. She was billed as a masseuse. I discovered she could lift my emotional state 50% just by touching me. So I taught her grounding, I taught her channeling, and I taught her to connect to her heart and her mind. And I worked with her with pictures, and she became the most potent resource anywhere on the planet for me. And I worked with her 2 to 5 hours a day for 6 weeks to get back on my feet. And I was able to make it through working closely with crystals. I addicted to tobacco and overeating, specifically to hold a container for the panic and overwhelm that I couldn't hold. It's better than, addicting to cocaine or something like that. I made more than 150 blogs, video blogs about trauma to make sense of it, to not be alone with the terror. I made more than 10 hours of taboo feelings and made a taboo emotional video blog. I created a creative video blog. So in short, I've put up more than 300 hours on YouTube in the last 6 months on different channels to get this unconscious stuff out and give it a home so that I don't have to be left holding everyone's stuff. And then I've listened and I've read, 20 books and listened to hundreds and hundreds of hours of, Alan Watts, Terence McKenna, Ram Dass, a whole series of stuff to try and, in a meditative state, make sense of all this. And I've done inner healing work. And my greatest healing of all has been to help another human being with trauma. And so we come to this state where things are resting, and Peter has not offered a refund. He has not offered an apology for much of this. None of the high facilitators has offered a full apology. And it's just a painful place in the relationship. And I think there's something valuable that wants to be born here. I think it's an insight and a character and a love that cares more about that virgin princess than it does about the town. That is willing to fight for what's beautiful in us rather than hand it over to be devoured by the sociopathic institutions that could give a shit as long as they protect themselves. I think there's stuff to be learned, stuff to be germinated, new seeds, that when these truths are let in with love, with understanding, with the awareness that there are no enemies. There are no enemies. There are people in the capacity and state to hurt one another. There are people willing to defend their wounds at any expense. But those are not our enemies. Those are people in desperate need who have wounds that need attention. And it's, blame as a coping mechanism, all this stuff. I've, explored an intense amount of coping mechanisms. And there have been many consequences to this. My house, which was just about to start getting built, got delayed because I couldn't cope with the insanity of the Marin County courthouse building procedure and the insanity at high and my fatigue and the traveling and all the healing coping. So my house has just been on indefinite hold for 2 years. There was $89,000 in savings on December 10th when I began this process. Now I'm $20,000 in debt. The first time I've been in debt in more than 10 years. This has had an enormous cost. A woman doesn't have her doctorate degree. A woman doesn't have her job. I've not been able to do my work as competently as I could have. And I've been absolutely terrified that I wouldn't be able to keep up with this wave, that the wave of energy and backlash coming at me would be stronger than my wave of progress and able to claw forward. And it's touch and go at times, because there are deep waves of emotion, there's deep waves of physical exhaustion, and life keeps throwing curveballs. But I believe that when we have the courage to see, I believe in the medicine of human consciousness. And I believe that when we can clearly see all of the pain, all of the fear, all of the trauma, all the wound, when we understand what is needed, when we love ourselves and each other enough to not sell out to lies, but to take a stand that the truth is all of our friends, that the enemy is not some person who talks about some illegal or unethical activity of a high facilitator. Of course, there's the backlash and the whole Christian thing. You should be grateful. Those facilitators did this for you and did that for you. It's all a defense. It's not the point. These patterns hurt people. There's no way to change them without seeing them. They can be changed if they are seen. It is in everyone's interest to see them and change them. And it is great kindness to care enough about a human being, an organization, a group, to take a stand for owning the blind spots that are evident. We all have a different perspective of reality from this world. And the greatest value that we bring is to show one another what the world looks like from these unique set of eyes. And having experienced states in the last 3 years that surprised me, that had nothing to do with what I thought was consciously going on, that told me there's a whole nother world that I'm at war with and I don't even know it, that told me that in order to be sane, I've got to be strong enough to face the insanity of some major supports around me. That's a big deal. It's a big deal. So I'm going to close for now, and we'll do probably one more segment, but I'm going to close for now. And just leave you with the thought, there is no person in any of this process who is the enemy. The pattern is our enemy. And every person becomes our enemy when they enforce the pattern, and becomes our ally when they help us see the pattern and dissolve the pattern and create a new pattern.